History always tends to repeat itself, but not usually this quickly. You all know the story of Concord by now, the biggest blunder and financial flop in entertainment history. The game has become the poster child of cancelled Californian rot and the flagship franchise of live service slop. So, with PlayStation laying off over 900 members of staff in America and shifting corporate leadership away from the States and back into Japan, you would think that they wouldn't be at all keen to make a similar mistake ever again, but 1 year later, here we seemingly are. It appears that Sony never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity, trying to release yet another team-based extraction shooter, striking while the iron is dead cold. Honestly, the trailer for this game might have the greatest comment section I have seen in a while, but jokes aside, all signs, including the recent announced delay of the game, point towards this American-produced game becoming the next big laughingstock among AAA failures. So, with that said, join me today as we not only go back to scrutinise the unfolding disaster so far, but also find out why Concord is getting a sequel so fast. I am Lady Decade, and if you like spicy gaming content, then hit that subscribe button, because it's time to talk about the sad Concord follow-up that no one asks for. There are loads of titles released these days, but don't let the sea of live service slop fool you. Good games are still being made, and you can grab a load of them right now for way less than full price. I have more than 30% off for you on Wu Chang Fallen Feathers, Stellar Blade, Expedition 33, and thousands of other great releases. Use my link below, treat yourself to some bargains, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. Everyone's heard of the Titanic, the infamous luxury liner that cost a fortune to build and famously sank on its maiden voyage. Over 100 years later, the name still conjures images of human hubris, corporate vanity, and disaster dressed up as innovation. And yet, what most people forget is that the Titanic wasn't sailing solo. She had sister ships, the Olympic, which had a long but troubled service life, and the Britannic, which sank during World War I after hitting a naval mine. The point isn't that they all suffered identical fates, is that they all shared the same blueprint, the same overconfidence, the same flawed assumptions. So, just like those doomed vessels, Concord is not alone. If Concord was the Titanic of the gaming world, a $400 million life service gamble that sank in just 11 days, then Marathon is its spiritual sister. Built under the same life service ideology, marketed with the same buzzword-heavy bravado, and steering straight towards the same iceberg of apathy, rejection, and wasted potential. But the twist? This time, anyone with common sense already knew the iceberg was there. So let's dive into the timeline of exactly how the Marathon ship was built, how it started taking on water, and why Sony seems hell-bent on going down with it. While Concord was an expensive first voyage, Marathon is the ship that watched its sister sink and said, yeah, let's do that too. The strange thing is, Marathon didn't start out as a disaster. In fact, back in 2019, before Sony even got involved, Bungie was in a different place entirely. They'd just escaped their toxic marriage to Activision, regaining full control of Destiny and, more importantly, their creative independence. With the shackles off, the studio began quietly laying the groundwork for something new, a return to their roots and a revival of the cult classic Marathon IP that had once put them on the map in the pre-Halo days. Oh yeah, I probably should have mentioned that Marathon is a legacy IP. The original Marathon game is a bit of a cult legend, never a commercial juggernaut, but extremely influential, particularly within the Mac gaming scene of the 1990s and among early FPS developers. Released in December 1994 by Bungie, this Macintosh exclusive first-person shooter gained cult status for being ahead of its time. Often described as the Mac's answer to Doom, Marathon stood out with its stronger emphasis on narrative and atmosphere. Instead of flashy cutscenes or simple mission briefings, the game delivered its story through in-game computer terminals, letting players slowly piece together a dense, philosophical plot involving rogue AIs, alien invaders, and a colony ship orbiting the star Tau Ceti. The game's tone was darker and more cerebral than many of its contemporaries, laying the groundwork for Bungie's later storytelling style in Halo. Technically, Marathon introduced features that were groundbreaking for the era. It supported mouse look, had dynamic lighting, allowed for rooms stacked vertically, unlike Doom, and even included proper physics for things like grenade jumping. It also featured network multiplayer via AppleTalk, which was rare in 1994. Bungie's focus on both narrative and technical ambition gave the game a fiercely loyal fanbase, especially within the relatively small world of Mac gaming. In terms of sales, Marathon was a hit within its niche. Estimates suggest it sold between 150,000 and 200,000 copies. Not impressive by today's standards, but solid for a Mac-only release in the early 90s. Its success led to two sequels, Marathon 2 Durandal in 1995, which also made its way to Windows PC, and Marathon Infinity in 1996. These titles expanded the lore and gameplay complexity, further cementing the series as a thinking person's FPS. Although Marathon never reached the mainstream popularity of Doom or Quake, its legacy is undeniable. It directly influenced Halo, with many thematic and mechanical elements carrying over: rogue AI characters, mysterious ancient alien civilizations, and even some user interface design choices. Today, the entire trilogy is available for free through the open source Aleph 1 project, which lets modern players revisit the series on current platforms. Which is nice. Ultimately, though, Marathon was never designed to be a blockbuster. It was a game built by passionate developers for a limited audience, and that audience adored it. That's what makes the current Marathon reboot so baffling. A once bold creative project that has been transformed into a shallow live service cash grab, trading soul for synergy and storytelling for season passes. In 2022, Sony acquired Bungie for $3.6 billion. A staggering sum, even by industry standards. On the surface, Sony promised Bungie independence, but behind the curtain, they were slotting them into their shiny new live service centre of excellence. Marathon was no longer Bungie's creative rebirth. It was now a key piece of Sony's new empire, one of 12 live service titles planned to dominate the PlayStation pipeline. And no, by the way, this isn't satire. PlayStation genuinely intended Marathon and Concord to be two games of a total of 12. Suddenly, the project that had started as a revival of a 1990s sci-fi shooter was being retooled into something much more so-called marketable. Something for the modern audience. Something with seasonal updates, FOMO-based unlocks, and a monetization strategy stapled on before the gameplay systems were even finalized. Essentially, every diabolically predictable and predatory monetization trope that will have anyone with half a brain cell rolling their eyes. By May of 2023, the rebranded Marathon made its first public appearance at the PlayStation Showcase. It was flashy, it was loud, it was absolutely drowning in neon sludge. Essentially, it looked like a cyberpunk Fortnite cosplay with zero gameplay and an AI voiceover written entirely in buzzwords. You know, all of the usual red flags that warn us not to touch a product. And on the surface, some people were curious, intrigued by the nostalgia, excited to see Bungie doing something with their IP. But under the hood, trouble had already begun and things had already started falling apart. You see, behind the glossy trailer and vaporwave visuals, Marathon was already rotting from the inside, and not long after the game's flashy debut, Bungie was hit with a scandal, one they clearly hoped would never see daylight. 8 women came forward with serious allegations against Barrett, the man leading the project and a 25-year Bungie veteran. These weren't minor complaints. According to multiple reports, Barrett used his seniority and status to make inappropriate comments, send flirtatious messages, and blur the lines between professional and personal. He asked women to play Truth or Dare, talked about his wealth, and implied he could fast-track careers. So, what did Bungie do? Sweep it under the rug, of course. Internally, they told staff Barrett was on sabbatical while quietly locking him out of the company systems. There was no statement or transparency just silence. Then, months later, Joe Ziegler, former Valorant director, casually tweeted that he'd been working as Marathon's director for the past 9 months. Translation: Bungie had replaced Barrett while pretending he was still on board. The consequences were obvious. Creative whiplash, confused priorities. Barrett had pitched a game built around custom characters and open-ended play, but under Ziegler, that vision was ditched for something far more marketable. A hero shooter, predefined avatars, cleaner silhouettes for merch and marketing slides. And if you thought that was the end of it, think again. In December 2024, Barrett came back swinging with a $200 million lawsuit accusing Bungie and Sony of fabricating the investigation just to avoid paying him $50 million in equity. It's an ugly mess. And it all happened at the worst possible time for a game already under pressure. This wasn't just a leadership change, it was a total breakdown in trust, direction, and momentum. And Marathon was about to feel the consequences. At the exact same time that the Barrett scandal was transpiring, Bungie decided to light an additional fire under its own studio. In July 2024, Bungie laid off 220 employees, a full 17% of its entire workforce. Every department was affected, and even senior leadership roles weren't spared. To soften the blow, 155 of those roles were absorbed into Sony, because nothing says creative freedom like being handed a new corporate lanyard. But it wasn't just a cost-cutting exercise. Bungie's own leadership admitted they were, in their own words, in the red. They'd been overambitious, burning through cash with a budget built on vibes rather than reality. The company was floundering, and the studio that once promised a bold new future post-Activision was now being reined in and restructured. This wasn't just a team losing numbers, this was a team losing direction. And while Joe Ziegler remained in the director's seat, the game's creative leadership continued to shuffle behind the scenes. By mid-2025, even Marathon's creative director, Steve Cotton, was quietly replaced by Julia Nardin. Another change in vision, another pivot in tone, and yet more evidence that no one at the top could decide what this game was actually supposed to be. It was becoming increasingly clear Marathon wasn't in active development anymore. It was in corporate triage. But even more drama would be around the corner. If the layoffs hadn't already wrecked morale, what came next would set fire to whatever goodwill was left. In May 2025, independent artist Andy Real publicly accused Bungie of plagiarizing her work, and this wasn't some vague resemblance or a heavily inspired by situation, it was blatant. We're talking one-to-one lifts from her 2017 portfolio. Symbols, designs, textures, even her own personal logo. Her name, blurred but still legible, had somehow made it into Marathon's in-game environment art. She didn't just tweet about it, she posted side-by-side comparisons, so precise they might as well have been labelled before and after. Bungie's response? Damage control again! They blamed a former artist, claimed it was slipped into a texture sheet without anyone else noticing, and said the current team had no idea it was there. But by that point, the narrative was already out of their hands. The story spread like wildfire, and public sentiment already hanging by a thread after the Barrett scandal, layoffs, and lackluster gameplay reveals turned firmly against them. For many, this wasn't just another misstep, it was the last straw. A studio that once prided itself on craft and creativity was now facing accusations of corporate theft during an alpha test for a game nobody even wanted. Marathon had started as a legacy revival, but by May, it was a meme. If the art theft scandal had set fire to the PR department, the alpha test poured on the petrol. Between April and May of 2025, Bungie opened up Marathon for its first closed alpha. But in a move that raised more eyebrows than excitement, they dropped the NDA, meaning players were allowed to stream it, post footage, and publicly share their feedback. That might sound like confidence, but in hindsight, it felt more like desperation, and The feedback was brutal. Players described the game as boring, lacking tension, and painfully shallow. The AI enemies were dumb as rocks, the gunplay felt floaty, and the graphics for a 2025 release looked like they were struggling to catch up with 2017. And if you dared to play solo, good luck, there was no proper solo mode, and matchmaking with randoms was a frustrating mess. The result wasn't intensity, it was dead air, empty maps, broken encounters, and a gameplay loop that barely looped. The game was well below par. And then came the aim assist fiasco. On PC, the aim assist was so aggressive that it made controller input behave like an aimbot. Bungie ended up removing it mid-test, a rare move that completely altered gameplay halfway through the event. For many, it only added to the sense that the devs were winging it and not refining it. And the timing couldn't have been worse. The alpha overlapped almost perfectly with the anti-real art theft scandal, turning what should have been a milestone for the project into a disaster double bill. By the time the test wrapped up, the writing was on the wall. Feedback was overwhelmingly negative. The hype was dead. And within weeks, Bungie would delay the game indefinitely. But wait, there is still more. Just when you think the optics couldn't get any worse, they go and send out influencer boxes. Yeah, I've got one. I've got no idea why though. Let's be blunt though. If you're a PR rep looking at my channel and thinking, this is someone who will help us soften the blow of a collapsing live service shooter, then I think you need to get your eyes checked, because I'm not exactly subtle when it comes to criticising corporate bloat, waste, and pretending style can cover for substance. And yet someone at either Bungie or Sony decided it would be a good idea to send me a box of Marathon branded goodies while they were simultaneously laying off game developers en masse. Not a press briefing, not a gameplay build, a box. In the same year, Sony laid off 900 people, and Bungie itself culled nearly a fifth of their studio. There's one thing to launch a game that's clearly not ready, I mean, it happens, but sending out glossy PR packages while the house is visibly on fire, that's either desperation, delusion, or the most expensive episode of cognitive dissonance I've ever seen. And more to the point, it's not impressing anyone, certainly not me. You don't patch a sinking ship with branded water bottles and a badge that says "Trust us, it's fine." And don't get me wrong, I don't say this to sound ungrateful. I say it because this is the problem. Marathon isn't failing because players are mean or critics are unfair. It's failing because the people in charge are more interested in selling a vibe than finishing a game. Because corporate PR budgets are still inflated while the people making the games are being told to clear out their desks. Giving out these gifts isn't just, in my opinion, a bad PR move. It's symbolic of exactly why the whole thing is falling apart. Now, here's where I'm going to step back a moment from the facts and start a bit of the old speculation, because this delay might not just be about the alpha feedback or internal morale. It might be about something much bigger, a shift in leadership. As of May 2025, Hideaki Nishino officially became the new CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, and unlike his recent predecessors, he's not a California tech exec with a Silicon Valley playbook. He's a Japanese executive, someone far more aligned with Sony's original identity, and someone who likely sees the writing on the wall when it comes to live service bloat and American mismanagement. And suddenly, within weeks of Nishino stepping into the top job, Marathon, a game emblematic of that failed American strategy, is yanked off the schedule. Its marketing pulled, its launch erased from the roadmap. Coincidence? Maybe. But given the timing and the fact that this delay happened after 2 years of hype, development and very expensive influencer boxes, it's hard not to wonder whether Nishino took one look at the state of this thing and said, "Ugh. Brother, ugh. We're not doing this again." Building on this theory, this wouldn't be the first sign of a pivot either. You've got Cellerblade, Rise of the Ronin and Astrobot leading Sony's new direction, all single player, all Japanese developed or Japanese led. Compare that to the American wreckages of Concord and Marathon and you start to see a pattern. Sony Japan is back at the wheel. maybe this delay isn't just a delay. Maybe it's a quiet execution, and if it is, good. Regardless of whether the game sees the light of day or not, here we are again. We have another bloated shooter with no audience, another live service gamble crashing under the weight of its own hubris, another American studio burning millions trying to chase a trend that was already dead by the time they booted up the dev kit. Marathon isn't just following in Concord's footsteps, it studied its mistakes, replicated them, and somehow found a way to make them worse. The same corporate delusion, the same empty promises, the same catastrophic outcome, only this time we saw the iceberg coming, and maybe, just maybe, that's why this ship is being quietly steered back into the dry dock. With Nishino at the helm and Japan reclaiming the wheel, it's possible that Marathon's indefinite delay isn't just damage control, it's course correction, a long overdue one. There's no saving this wreck, and frankly I think they should give up trying. Don't forget, Wu-Chang Fallen Feathers is on pre-order right now, and it makes most modern Western games look like concept art gone wrong. It's that stunning. So use my affiliates link to grab a Wu-Chang with 32% off. And while you're at it, you can also get some big savings on Expedition 33, Stellar Blade, Black Myth Wukong, and thousands of other top-tier titles. Each purchase supports my work simultaneously, and if you want to support what I do in a more personal way and gain access to my behind-the-scenes cosplay library and more over on Patreon. See you in the next video.